Hi, welcome to the Three Times Podcast. Today I'm talking to Vic Gammon, a distinguished music historian, teacher and a composer and player in the traditional folk style. A man who, in a very full musical career, has played with folk aristocracy including Martin Carthy and Judy Collins. You can find more of Vic's music online. The links are in the show notes. This episode has two parts. This is part 2. So, as a connoisseur of traditional folk music, both from an academic point of view and as a practitioner, what do you think we can learn from it today? For what would a modern musician profit by from listening to traditional music?
Well, I think there's all sorts of interesting musical aspects. I think there's a lot of social aspects. I mean, I like we have these sessions where we just sit around and play to each other, and that's a very interesting way of passing a social time. I mean, tomorrow I'm going to the Peel Tower in Corbridge, and there'll be a mainly instrumental music session. It's good-natured, people listen to each other, people join in with each other. It's just generally, it's an interesting way. It's sort of... I suppose there's another dichotomy in music which is really interesting, which is the written and the oral in a way. I mean, folk music is mainly an oral music, but not entirely. And there's something about the immediacy of oral music which is quite fascinating. It's really interesting. I used to go to a Christmas party of a friend of mine, New Year's Boxing Day party. He was one of the interesting people who had feet in a couple of different camps. He played in the Huddersfield Symphony Orchestra, he played the French horn, and he played the melodeon in traditional dance bands. And so his friends were, they were folky musicians, and they were people from the symphony orchestra, good amateur symphony orchestra. And his wife was in a similar, she was a leader of another symphony orchestra, lead violinist. And yet she was a pretty good fiddle player on traditional music. So, one music education, Keith Swanwick had this idea of bimusicality, that you can actually operate in different musical genres if you're good. I mean, someone like Wynton Marsalis does this. I mean, anyway, we could sit. I mean, I can sit down and play till midnight now, and I'll play all sorts of different tunes, and they'll all be in my head. And the only thing that will stop me playing is if I can't remember. So I have lists of tune titles. I don't know what I know, in a sense. The classical people would come along. And I'd say, how do you do it? How do you know all that music? And I said, well, you just know it. You remember it. You remember how the tune goes. You have an ear. They could not wed themselves. Could not separate themselves from the actual written notes. And it's like you can read off a page but you can't speak to somebody. That's not quite an accurate analogy, but it's fairly close. Like I worked in music education for a time. I was a secondary teacher for a time, and then I went to Huddersfield. And I used to train teachers because I'd been a teacher, and I used to train music teachers. And quite unusual in that I didn't have a standard music academic. You know, I hadn't done a music degree. I'd done a history degree, but I was been a reasonably good music teacher in primary and secondary schools, and I got into teacher training. And at Huddersfield, we had. It was the epicentre almost of the brass band world. You had Black Dyke Mills up the road in Bradford. You had, Betters of the Barn just over in Manchester, Sellers in Huddersfield. These great brass bands, world champion crack brass bands. And some, a reasonable number, I used to take 20 or so students a year, and a reasonable number would come and train as music teachers because it allowed them, if they were interested. And they were wonderful in terms of, you give them a piece of quite complex music and they say, right, play this. They look at it over there. It would be very accurate, very fast, much better sight reader than I am. And, fantastic. And I say, right, this week we're going to do some improvisation. They say, what? No. They couldn't even think of going there. And we do pretty, start off with simple stuff, the sort of stuff you would do with kids, and yet it was out with their idea of what musical activity was, So I think there's sort of, competences. There are different competences within music. You play me a simple tune, I can probably, if I can get the key right, and I can play back to you. And other people just couldn't without that intervention of the musical sheet, Which doesn't mean music is a bad thing. It means that there's certain ways in which they've applied themselves to that technology. And
I guess that is one thing that has characterised music making by younger people today, is that they do extemporise a lot, don't they?
Yes.
And by and large, most people don't read music while they're doing it.
It varies, but yes, And there's always been that mix. Looking back at, as I say, I've done a fair bit of studying of the old church band music of the 18th, early 19th century, and some people were quite musically literate and they could write out, their psalms in parts and everything. Others obviously just basically did it by ear, and you had this interesting melding. And I think there's quite a lot of that goes on. It certainly goes on in folk music, that there are some people who can read music and get their songs, their tunes off music. There's other technologies now, of course. You've got MIDI, for example, that can play you a tune that's written out, and you go on a website like The Session, which is basically an Irish music website, but there's a lot of other stuff there as well. And you can have the tune it in standard notation. You can have it in ABC notation, which is an interesting sort of rather concise form of writing tunes down, and you can have it in MIDI form, so you can hear it played in a rather mechanistic way, but you can hear it played, and so there's lots of ways of learning a tune and so on.
Yeah. You said that again in another interview. You said that you're a much better musician now than you were.
I think so.
As a younger person, is that by virtue of the passage of time?
Yeah, I think so. Reasons? Time and experience. When I was a professional musician, I was in my 20s. I hadn't had that much experience, and I think, I was playing with some quite famous people, but I just think I've got better. Other people may disagree, but that's up to them, isn't it?
So keep at it would be the advice there.
Yeah, if you're interested. If you're not, go and do something else.
Another thing that struck me is you compared, in particular, composing songs to painting.
Yeah,
elaborate on that.
I've become interested in songwriting. It's what I spend a lot of time doing now. I put out one CD in a couple of years ago, and I've got a whole batch of. I've got another set of songs. I don't think I'll do a CD. I think I'll just put it straight online. It's so much hassle, making the physical product. It's not even the expense, it's the work it takes, and you can go and you can put your stuff on SoundCloud and tell people it's there and people can go and see it. I do think it's like, it just reminds me that it's like painting because, just now, I mean, you record a song, you put another track to it. I tend to use, I mean, I do get friends in to play with me sometimes, but I do a lot of multi-tracking because I play different instruments and so on. And so you're all the time you're trying to balance that thing out. You're trying to balance the shades, the So what's your subject? So songwriting, I think it's really like painting. I think it's the best analogy almost. I mean, it's limited in that a painting is limited. I mean, you've got a 3-minute to 5-minute song. You're trying to make a point in it. All right, it exists through time in a way that painting is always sort of in front of you, while you're looking at it at least. But I think there's a whole thing where, trying to get the elements together. And if you do the total job, I mean, I write words, I write music, I write arrangements, I put together the soundscape, if you like. Trying to do that, it really does seem to me one of the nearest analogies is, trying to make a picture that has balance, that has, shades and has an interesting subject. And, it does seem to me it's an analogous. It's more analogous than, say, writing a novel, which is a long form. That, song is an intensive form. It's quite short, really. And it's not an opera, it's not a bigger work, and in that way I think, painting, you can make other analogies, but that one works fairly well.
And the colours have to be bright, of course,
yes,
in a short song to attract the attention.
Yeah, although I think that there's so much attention grabbing now. I mean, we live in a world where, it's almost nice not to go for attention. I don't have to live off my music. I don't have to sell vast quantities of it, I can sort of please myself. I mean, I do it for artistic satisfaction, I think. And if people like it, and sometimes they do, and sometimes they say they do, that's great, If they don't, well, I've had the satisfaction of doing it,
So it's a bit like putting your paintings up in a gallery and saying, come and look at my
look
pictures
at my
if you want
to.
to.
Absolutely. And the other thing I like is when people perform my songs, other people. It's happened not that often, but a couple of songs that I've done have been taken up and used by other people, and that's nice. I like that, and I don't care what they do with it. I'm not precious that they should do it my way. I'm very interested that they use it as a basis to make an interpretation. But that's very satisfying. By chance, I was up in Fife at this session, and these two young women had heard a song of mine off a recording of someone else. I said, we didn't know you were going to be here. Is it all right? I said, go ahead, sing it. And they did a lovely job. It wasn't like I sing it. It wasn't even like the way the guy on the record, Pete Card, sang it. But, smashing. I like that. So I'm very happy to do that. I don't like, going back to the professional musician in the 70s, I don't like travelling. I'll go as far as Whitby. I'm regularly perform at the Whitby Festival, and other people, I go up to the Fife Sing Festival, but a lot of that is musical sharing anyway, and I'd do it if they didn't book me. I'd go for the hell of it, just to enjoy it. What I don't do is we had a musician friend of mine here to stay, and he was travelling to Bristol the next night. I remember once when I was on the road, when I was working with Etchingham Steamboat, we did Southampton, and then we did Ashington. And that was before the motorways were...
How long did that journey take?
Too long.
10 to 12 hours?
Yeah, it was a long time. This would be about 1975 or so. Another time we were in Birmingham, we had a gig that night it was in East, I think it was in Norwich. If I try to get from Birmingham to, there aren't roads that run that way. The roads run up and down on the whole. So, it's so exhausting. And so when I'd come home off tour, I'm very pleased I did it. Don't get that wrong. I was very pleased I had an experience of being a professional musician for a year or so. And But you'd come home and you'd be a zombie for 2 or 3 days before you could get yourself together, and then pick up the pieces to carry on. So, it's an interesting thing. I'm very pleased. And working at Newcastle, I mean, it was a quite interesting progress in terms of I've worked in music education, which I'd always been interested in, and since it must have been the 1970s really. And I'd always thought of being a teacher, and when I qualified, when I got my doctorate, there was nothing much. This is Maggie Thatcher's Britain, mid-1980s, and there was nothing much going. So I did what I always thought of doing. That became a primary teacher first of all, and then a secondary teacher. I just moved, and then moved into teacher training, and I was at Huddersfield, then at Leeds. In Leeds, I moved from some interesting people in the music department realised that I had specialist interests and skills, and I became the manager of a popular and world music course, which they then ran, and so that was the way I got into music departments. And I only have O-level music, I don't have anything more than that. I gave up A-level after a year and left and got a job. But it's how your inclinations take you. And
so what are your current research interests? You mentioned a couple of times you're carrying on.
Yeah, well, I just do odd things that people ask me to do, or the thing I'm just finishing off is an essay on fiddle players. Someone I know is producing a book on traditional instrumental music. And I'd done a presentation at the Sage on a thing called the English Fiddle Symposium, and I said, well, I think I could develop that much further. And I mean, that was a fairly theoretical piece with some historical information, but I thought, really dig around, and I'm quite pleased with it in that it really is trying to plug a hole. It really deals with two things. It deals with the importance of fiddle players in sort of pre-industrial, early industrial society. We're talking from, say, sort of 1650 through to about 1900. I like that long period because it's sort of, it encompasses change, but it's also got a lot of things that stay quite stable. And it's about the way in which they are important characters. You can't, because the rarity of music comes back to that point, you can't have a good time. If you want to have a good time, you've got to have a musician there, you see. Now, I mean, this can lead to things you don't want. I mean, London pubs in the later 17th century are inhabited by musicians who will come and play for you but expect money. They'll come to your alcove or your table and, play for you. So you're really pestered by these people. On the other hand, you can't think of having a wedding without having a fiddle player who would often lead the wedding procession through. And so there's that whole celebration of the importance of the fiddle player. There often are usually solo fiddle players, and they're often referred to as the village fiddler, as if there's like a village blacksmith. So, and that I've balanced up with this notion of competence and incompetence. The way in which the press that they get is often terrible. It's often, oh God, the awful sound. The essay is called the caterwauling strains of thrashing fiddlers, and that is a quote from an early 18th century writer called Ned Ward, and it sums it up. This is what people think. Caterwauling strain. It's a big noise, and they're thrashing, and so it's really to looking at both those things and trying to get some historical balance into it. And I do think there were people who were really very, very competent, very able, very good at what they did. One in Hexham, I come across a guy dies in the 1850s in Hexham. He's revered as a really well-known fiddle player. As I say, I was talking about Willie Taylor, who lived up in North. I mean, he's within living memory. He died in the 1980s, 90s, something like that. And he was a fabulous fiddle player. And there were others who, some of the recordings that have been made of traditional fiddle players, and the music is not particularly. They may be rusty, they may be old, but you don't get the impression their fiddle playing was that good. So it's really trying to balance up those two things: the importance of music as a focus for celebration, and the idea that music musicians do vary in competence, and that we don't want to forget that. I think it's important consideration.
Yeah, nor should it be a deterrent to...
No, but also there's a social aspect to, God, I think that music's terrible. I mean, if I listen to something I don't like, heavy metal, I can see the reasons for it, but I don't want to have to listen to it, That's my response to heavy metal. That doesn't mean it's bad music. That means I don't respond to that music that well, but there's a certain middle class attitude, particularly among the sort of educated, the people who've been to university and to Cambridge and so on, the clergymen, for example, hear vernacular music and they say, God, that's awful. But they would say the same about the way those people spoke. They would, and there was nothing wrong with the way they speak. They spoke the language they knew, you see. So now, some of them would have been more articulate than others. But that's exactly why I'm interested in trying to explore these ideas. So I'm quite pleased that I've more or less finished it, and it's got to go off to the editor. The editor's seen the first draft and came back with some ideas which were pretty helpful, and I've sorted it out a bit and. Just got to get it off to them really, but they're not pestering me, so I still keep
That's
looking.
Always a mistake.
Still keep fiddling. It is. I do well with deadlines. I do really well with deadlines, and I don't like letting people down, but I don't necessarily get on with things. But the other thing I'm doing is songwriting. I mean, I just found that my wife does crossword puzzles, and I think there's a similarity. See, I mean, she. The only thing I'd say is different is she gets to finish a crossword puzzle and gets the satisfaction of that. I get to finish a song and record it and so on. It's that ability to go at something and put it together till it's right. I like painting.
And do you have what I would call an inner urge to do that, to write that song?
Yes, I do. In that I sort of believe in creativity. I do believe in creativity as a good thing. I think it's stimulating. I think it's challenging. I think it's I think you'd have less unhappy people in the world if more people were creative. Now that may sound like theology, but I actually believe it. That I like. Things like the University of the Third Age painting group, not they're great painters, but they're involved in a creative activity. I think there's a sort of inner satisfaction to that. You never get it perfect. That's not the point. You never get it perfect, but you make something that is sort of okay, and you're pleased with it, and you go on from there,
And do you, when you think about creating a song, do you have a purpose in expressing that? Do you think I want to have my say?
I do write political stuff. I do write about the environment. I write about I do write some. I mean, not all of them, but some of the songs certainly have a political sort of point to them. I think they're hard to do. Again, that's part of the challenge. I mean, I don't believe in songs that just put you in a corner and preach at you. I mean, they've got to have some inner interest, some some poetry, some lyricism that makes them work. But I certainly believe in. Some of the songs I do are quite funny. One of the most successful songs I wrote was the Kings and Queens of England, which is, a song about, royalty isn't all it's cracked up to be. Charles II had 11 bastard children, George III went mad. That's how it starts, I mean, so it paints a picture of a very dysfunctional monarchy, not just in our present age, but through the centuries, So I quite like humour. It's not all the stuff is humorous by any means, but I think that's, again, if you do a programme, if you do a performance, it's nice to have some humorous elements to balance up more serious stuff, and again, not just preaching at people, because I'm not sure that works,
So when you're out and playing, do you play your own stuff as well as traditional tunes?
I do, yeah, I do. It depends where I'm playing, what I'm playing. I mean, I go up to Fife, I mean, it's really a traditional singing weekend, and I will perform probably all traditional material. I go other places, folk clubs that, very wide in their attitude. I may well mix. If I do solo bookings, I usually mix it up. I usually do a predominance of traditional stuff in the first half and predominance of written stuff in the second. You know, it's an interesting balance. You know, it's not always an easy one to negotiate, but you try and do it. I sort of think that if you just sang traditional songs, I mean, which are very interesting, and I've written about the history of them and so on. But you would, you know, if you're not making something for now, even if it's based on traditional models and so on, then there's a sort of museum quality to it that you know, you've got to try and say that's what they did in the past. That they you know, wrote songs about. You know, why would you write a song about Napoleon other than Napoleon happened and was an important influence? You know, all those songs date from sort of 1790s, early 1800s, you know. So I think that's interesting. I think, you know, I think there's a lot of prejudice and sort of false sort of notions of authenticity. I don't have much time for sort of rigid notions of authenticity, you know. I mean, some people don't like the fact that I accompany my songs. They really feel that the English tradition is unaccompanied. Well, I think it was largely unaccompanied because people couldn't afford musical instruments. I mean, I think it's as easy as that. So I'm performing now for... I had a colleague at Newcastle, very interesting, was it man, he was interesting, he was West right. He says all music is contemporary music. If you're performing it now, it's contemporary music. So you know, it makes you think that sort of notion that you know, it's for now, it's for today. It's, you know, even if you're doing it from the past, well, that's a complex relationship then, which comes back to the history. Why should you investigate the history? Because otherwise you probably misinterpret the thing anyway, you know.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to the 3 Times podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and tell your friends about it.